cancer is our best friend. It's our highest opportunity we have right now to say, oh my gosh, this is the signal that our own bodies are losing touch with itself and manifesting this state of loneliness that we would call cancer. Instead of warring against that, if we would love those cells back into our body, we would disappear this whole condition.
I believe that each and every one of us has the power within ourselves to create the life that we really want. And I want to help give you the tools to make that happen. I'm Danica Patrick, and I'm pretty intense. Welcome to the Pretty Intense podcast. I say that in a very serious way because today, Dr. Zach Bush is on. And look, you're probably not going to understand all of the things said on the show today, as I didn't. But that doesn't matter. In the context that he puts this information forward to help you understand more about the body, the environment, and how it all interacts with each other is the fundamental, is what you're going to get from it. It's not, you don't have to know what all the words are and all the science behind it, but it's really cool to hear the explanation and then how it applies to you and the things that you need to do to, essentially like build a better body. I feel like this is one of those episodes that I need to listen to a few times to like let the information integrate and really remember. But a huge takeaway is just that, look, gut health is really important. He has a deep history of medical knowledge that wants to make you think that, in the medical world, as he said, it wants to make you think that it's complicated and there's lots of diseases and lots of magic potions to try and make you better and medicines, but it's a lot more simple than that. So please enjoy today's episode. I do think it's important that everybody understands the depth of your medical accomplishments and your education so that we can transition into where you're at now, because it gives, to me and to everyone, it's going to give such validity to it instead of it being something that you've been a certain way of thinking that you've had all along. You started out extremely integrated in the medical field and excelled. And then things shifted. So here we go. So you completed med school in 2002. You're one of the few triple board certified physicians. You got the James Warning Award for Outstanding Scholarship in the field of internal medicine. And then after you did your internship and residency, they asked you to stay on another year as chief resident. You were accepted into the prestigious Endocrinology Fellowship at the University of Virginia. And then you went on to 3 years of research. Did I kind of check?
Whoever's doing your research is doing deeper than most people.
Some
you got
boxes.
Some good little details out of it. The John Waring Award in internal medicine, that's not a well-known award, so I'm impressed you guys found that one.
I wrote warning, bummer. See, my writing isn't as good as the research. But anyway, the point is that you've clearly excelled. You had a ton of education, and then you went into 3 years of research. And this is kind of where things change. So maybe you can explain the research that you were doing and what gave you what seems like a paradigm shift.
Yeah, in this case, it wasn't necessarily a single moment, but more like a coalescence of maybe 5 or 6 moments that came together around 2008 to 2010. The field of medicine was changing a lot, partially because of economics. And so the collapse of the economy that happened in 2008 had a huge influence on the National Institutes of Health and their funding. And so my research was suddenly caught up in this storm of collapse of financial footing underneath a lot of the universities. But coherent with that moment of financial stress, my intellectual model of how human biology happened started to go under some severe stressors itself and challenges to that paradigm. And it was coming out of the experience of doing my cancer research under the microscope and then seeing diabetes and autoimmune disease in clinic as an endocrinologist simultaneously. And so it was kind of this collision of these two big different subspecialties of medicine. And there was a day that I was watching tumors infiltrate healthy tissue, and you've actually seen this pattern many times. Anybody who's flown in an airplane has seen this pattern, that when you see a city spread across prairie and along highway lines and everything else, that looks identical to cancer moving through tissue. The patterns of growth follow that same behavior of our cities and their growth patterns.
As if it was inside the city and going out?
Yeah, so you have highways that stretch out,
Yep.
and then the way in which bands form around that and infrastructure comes around a highway system is very much the same way biology works. And so you have to have supply lines, you have to have, movement of materials and resources. It's very much a city infrastructure of a tumor building its own, infrastructure. And so I'm experiencing that and going through that kind of space, and then suddenly realize I'm running late to clinic, throw on a white coat, act like I'm a doctor, throw on a stethoscope, walk in, and suddenly there's a patient there that I've never met, and the whole room smells horrible, and his chief complaint is he's got this huge infected diabetic ulcer in his ankle. And so then for the next half hour, I'm down in this wound in this guy's ankle, and I'm dissecting dead tissue, trying not to throw up. And then suddenly there was a moment where I'm looking at healthy tissue and the infiltration of dying tissue inside of it as this necrotic tissue, and it was exactly the same pattern of the tumor I just saw. And it was one of those singularity moments. It was like, oh my gosh, I thought all of these things were different. I was taught that there was all these different pathophysiologies and complex systems, and what if there was only one thing, which is vitality and the lack thereof, health and the lack of health. And the lack of health then allows for disease or dysfunction to start to materialize in that vacancy of vitality. And suddenly I realized that I'd spent 20 years of my life in school debt, or a house mortgage worth of school debt, going down the wrong path, believing everything was complicated. And suddenly thought, what if everything was super simple? And as a physician, all I really had to do was figure out health. And I had zero preparation for that. I had no idea what human health was. I had no idea what would supply a cell to be a healthy biologic system. And so that was really where the paradigm started to shift, was what if there was no such thing as disease and only a paucity of health?
Yeah, that's big. I mean, that would be the way, wow, we're going to go deep real quick, but dis-ease in the body, or disease of the body, and how, where does that really come from, and is it manifested versus is it real, and what is the fabric of it? What is the real cure? And again, the complication of pills, needles, IVs, surgeries, all these drug companies making billions of dollars. Even as a simple example, I was sponsored by OneCure, which was a company that tries to find the cure for cancer in dogs, but it's called OneCure because it will cure people too, and that it's all really the same. And so, what did you do next?
I slipped into major depression. I really couldn't put it all together fast enough as to what the solution was going to be for my life pattern or path at that point. It was so overwhelming. At the time, I was doing chemotherapy research. I was developing chemotherapy for tumors, and that realization of maybe there is no such thing as disease was quickly followed by the realization that not a single cancer in human history has ever been caused by a lack of chemotherapy. And that simple moment was just said to me, it doesn't matter how smart you get, no matter how brilliant you think you are as a drug discovery unit or whatever it is, you're going down the wrong path. You will never find what you hope to find, which is something to help your patients. And I think we, for the most part, all go into medicine very altruistically, and yet we're caught up immediately in a machine that's not there for human health, but for monetary gain. And our research is funded by it. Our education is built around it. And so in this insidious fashion, we go from altruistic, I want to heal the world, I want to be this advocate for my patients, to what is the insurance going to reimburse me? How do I keep my clinic afloat? How do I pay off my school debt? In academia, I was on faculty at the University of Virginia and making $75,000 a year and had $150,000 of school debt, two kids heading towards college. like I was indentured servitude because there was no way I could pay off everything, and so middle level managers at McDonald's were making more than I did as
That is the system.
That's the system. And
Go into debt, have to work because you have to work. Don't question anything.
Yeah.
Be more wrapped up in the drama of paying your bills than the reality of what's going on. So you had mentioned, one of the fundamentals that I believe in as my fundamental, but possibly a conspiracy, is that there's no money in wellness. I mean, these drug companies have really, why would they be trying to cure you when then you won't use their product anymore, right? Why would they want you to know what makes you well? Why would they want you to eat really good? Why would the hospital give you the shit that you're supposed to eat instead of, they're giving you, more yogurt, more jellos, more, rolls, more McDonald's. There's McDonald's in hospitals. I mean, that is just ludicrous. So you had mentioned that these are all my ramblings of frustrations because, I believe in food as being a medicine, and that, big pharma, and, I'd read that these pharmaceutical studies, and you had just mentioned, who funds them? Yeah. What are they for? Of course, if they fund them themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, you have money running drug development running education then funneling back into the money development piece, and so it's a complete closed loop. And in medicine, I think is one, but I say at this point in the United States, we could say the same thing about banking and finance. The people who are teaching those business courses are the people that created the status quo of banking at the cost of humanity or whatever it is. So at each point we've created these closed loops of belief systems that drive education. And when the belief system drives the education, a paradigm shift becomes very challenging to manifest. And so in human behavior patterns that we've seen through all the time, there's no way that the current paradigm is going to change until absolute crisis hits us.
What would that look like?
It looks like the last 5 years. And so we are in the largest crisis we've ever seen in human history.
Describe the crisis. What crisis are you talking about? There's a whole lot of crises out there, but what are you talking about?
So the crisis we're in the midst of right now is what is fondly called the sixth extinction on the planet. We haven't seen this fast or rapid a decline in biology on the surface of the planet since about 55 million years ago when the dinosaurs went extinct.
So this would be the bees and things like that we're seeing. Is that part of that?
Yeah, so you hear about bees, you hear about some of the loss of big animal life, and you hear of endangered species, and you hear all this, but what you don't hear about is that we've actually killed 40% of biology on the planet in the last 50 years. So we're almost halfway done wiping out all of biology. And so to have that vast effect on all of biology on the planet, you start to realize that human biology collapse that we've seen over the last 20 years, which is this chronic disease explosion that we've had, has to be tied up in a bigger story than, human health just sucks because we eat McDonald's. No, if it was just a problem with McDonald's, then we would simply have a human problem. But we're wiping out biology at every fractal, from the virus all the way up to macro life like humans and large animals and ocean animals and the rest. And so to create that big of a shift in the ability of biology to survive, we must have did something fundamental to the fabric of biology.
What is that?
The fabric of biology really comes down to a catch term that's being thrown around with a lot of misperceptions right now, which is the microbiome. And the microbiome is a description of an environment or a large ecosystem of tiny bugs. And so you've got viruses at the bottom of that as far as size and kind of magnitude of spread. So I consider the viruses as the foundation. Sitting on top of that, you have the fungi. Fungi have some 5 million species, and so we think we get in a fancy grocery store and we have 4 or 5 species of mushrooms on there.
Friend love mushrooms.
Yeah, 5 million species of them.
Whoa, I haven't even started.
Yeah, you got a ways to go on your culinary adventure there.
I'll try them all. They're all fun no matter what kind.
A bunch of fun guys. And so you got that whole explosive, fungal kingdom sitting on top of this viral intelligence, And then sitting on that is the parasites. You got 300,000 species of parasites. And these guys are kind of the first semblance of multicellular organisms that would be kind of, predecessors to the worms and, the things you think of as being the soil kind of architects out there. But sitting on top of the parasite kingdom then is the bacterial kingdom, and we may have 30 or 40,000 species of bacteria that are critical to this biologic system. So you've got viruses, fungi, the parasites, and the bacteria creating this large ecosystem. And then somewhere way, way, way up in this almost pixel of life on Earth is humanity. And one way to look at the scale of all of this is genetics. The human species is almost non-existent genetically. We have only 20,000 genes. That's really pathetic because we already knew, by the time we figured out we had 20,000 genes, we knew that the fruit fly had 13,000 genes, and we knew that the flea had 30,000 genes. So you fall somewhere between a flea and a fruit fly when it comes to genetic complexity. And that's very fascinating when you think of the system that we build out of those mere 20,000 genes. And so you then compare that to, let's say, the bacteria. The bacteria with their 30,000 species have 2 million genes among that family. Then we go to the parasites. Those 300,000 species of parasites have around 2 billion genes. And then you go down to the fungi, and we're at 5 million species of fungi, and now you're looking at 125 trillion genes. And then you go down to the viruses, and we don't even know how many species of viruses. The rough estimate that we currently have of the number of viruses on Earth is 10 to the 31. That's a 1 with 31 zeros after it. We don't have a name for that number. That's, to put that in perspective on the kind of the galactic or universal scale, that's 10 million times more than our stars in the entire universe. And so 10 to the 31 viruses. And so really I wake up every morning and just so thankful that our Centers of Disease Control have figured out how to vaccinate us against 3 flu viruses every year. It's really ludicrous when we think about our concept of vaccination. Like, we're trying to protect ourselves from what? We've got 10 to the 31 viruses on the planet. That's so abundant with, quadrillions of genes that are affecting our mere 20,000 genes. And then we think of the fungi. And we've got 125 trillion genes that are affecting our genes. And then we get and so you start going down and you realize there's absolutely no way that human life came into existence without not only the allowance of the microbiome letting us be there, but only by the provision of the intelligence of the genomics of the microbiome of the world that we exist.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that as we've started to untangle what the genome actually is, we realize the plasticity and the interconnectedness of the genetics. We used to believe, when I went through medical school, 92 to that 96 was this really exciting time where we were decoding the human genome in that 4-year period. And by the time I was hitting medical school towards the end of that period, I was told that I would be the first generation of physicians that would be able to do what we called personalized medicine, where I'd go into a room, would ask no questions, swab their mouth, run a genomics profile, and know exactly what diseases they would have and what drugs they would respond to, and whether or not they should have children or not, and all these things. And so we really were calling this personalized medicine. Like, it was going to be so personal that it wasn't like I had to look at the population to figure out what you were going to be. So that was the promise. And that
sounds really pleasant. Should be called like naked medicine, because that's
right.
Whew.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going. Sorry.
But then within 2 years of that, we find out we only have 20,000 genes. But we knew we had 250,000 proteins coming from those mere 20,000 genes. So what that meant is we had completely the wrong model of DNA, which was very disruptive and didn't make many headlines because I think we were so insecure at the time that we didn't really want to talk much about that in public, because we wanted people to really believe we had figured out this whole Watson and Crick DNA thing.
What's the consequence of that?
The consequence was that we had no idea how life began again. And so
shit, aliens, we're there already. Gosh, we're there.
And so if DNA doesn't predict, if the gene doesn't predict the protein that it's going to go and make, if it's not the blueprint for the protein that's going to, what's determining that? What is really driving life, and what's driving the plasticity of life?
Consciousness. And
so, whoa, you just sped right to the end of it. That's freaking cool. This is the most efficient conversation I've ever had around.
Fantastic. And that's it. Thanks, everybody, for joining. No.
Excellent.
No, am I completely off? I mean, is that
No,
is
it's
that anything to do with it?
It has to have something to do with it because I guess that, as we're asking what is DNA ultimately and how does it interact with its greater system, I guess we can answer that real quick before we get to the mirror image of that, which is the consciousness piece. But what we found first was this phenomenon of epigenetics, which was a gene could be modified by methylation patterns, which was kind of a biochemistry modification on the surface of that gene to make sure that it can turn on or off at the right times or be modified to determine what it would produce as far as which protein it would go to produce. So epigenetics was the first. But
something that you could control. Epigenetics is something that you have some control over.
You have some control of it, but I'd say that what's really controlling that is your environment.
Okay.
And so if a big storm blows in, a big bolt of lightning and sudden clap of thunder, and you go into a startle or a reaction, you just changed over 2,000 genes instantaneously from an epigenetic modification of a fight or flight state.
Okay.
And so that environment around you, your genome has developed over the hundreds of thousands of years. We've been around 200,000 years, but the genomic progress towards the species of Homo sapiens sapien had to be layered on top of this learning experience of the environment shifting the genes and making them behave differently.
Right.
And so we're very, very plastic on that level. But then in the last kind of 6-7 years, as we've discovered microRNA that are produced, they're the messengers that are produced from your junk DNA. So I told you.
What is junk DNA?
Yeah, when you look at it in nature, I think you just are overwhelmed by the amount of junk, right? Mother Earth is just like full of junk.
Beautiful junk, but
it doesn't do junk. It's that we've gone down to this base belief that there was functional DNA that would create a gene, and the other 98.5% of the genome was junk. Is a pretty extraordinary leap of hubris there. That since we couldn't figure out what the 98.5% was doing because it wasn't making a gene, we went on to just call that junk DNA.
Kind of like dark matter. We don't know what it is, so we just call it dark matter.
Yeah, the physicists did the exact same thing. We can't describe 96% of the universe, and so we're going to call that dark matter. And we're going to say it just doesn't really exist. And so we're going to make a fudge factor number for dark matter, and we're going to put that into every physics equation and act like we know how the universe works. We did the same thing in genomics, only to find out that, of course, the 98.5% of the genome that we used to deem junk is the most important part in the sense that it creates these little tiny singling molecules that are called microRNA that do something very cool, which is leave the human cell. And so DNA turns into RNA, turns into a protein, and that can turn into an enzyme or any structural function within the cell, and that's all very cool. But microRNA gets to leave the human cell and go into your bloodstream. And ultimately, in this short amount of time that we've been talking, I've modified your genomics by breathing.
You better have done a good job.
Yeah,
I hope you've done a good job. I hope the epigenetic
see.
Environment I'm in will.
Yeah, the body you manifest tomorrow will depend on this interaction we're having right now. And so we're modifying each other through microRNA that we're secreting in our breath, and they go in these little pockets, these little exosomes that are secreted in our saliva, in the lining of our lungs. We breathe these out into the environment, and it interacts with the genomes all around us. And so if there's an insect in the room, I can modify that genome, but interestingly, that insect has a microRNA that's going out into the system and can modify me.
Is this evolution then of some sort?
I would say it's genomic singularity. We no longer can really hold the space of this species is this species. No,
right.
This species is genomically swapping information all the time, and all the other species are modifying this one. And as we've started to untangle, I told you how vast the microbiome is compared to ours. And as we start to untangle what is the source of the microRNA in your bloodstream, we already know that at least 30% of the microRNA, and I'm sure we're going to find out that 99% of your microRNA is non-human.
I knew you were going to say that. I was like, it's not ours, is it? Holy shit.
So at least 30% we've already figured out is coming from the bacteria and the fungi alone. And we haven't even started to untangle the viruses and the parasites yet. But with at least 30% of your microRNA coming from bacteria and fungi, and those microRNA will then go insert themselves back into your cells, travel into the nucleus, and bind to areas within the genome that would then go on to decide what that gene is going to make. We now know that any single gene can make anywhere from 200 to maybe 2,000 different protein outcomes. That's kind of like saying a blueprint of a house could build 2,000 different houses, depending on the environment in which that blueprint is rolled out. And that's literally what happens. DNA is packaged around these tiny little balls called histones, and it has to unravel. And amazingly, in every one of your microscopic cells, there's 6 feet of DNA.
No way.
There's 6 feet of DNA wrapped up around these tiny little histones so that it can be packaged down small enough to become a chromosome. You maybe heard that we have 46 chromosomes. You get 23 from mom, 23 from dad. They come together, you have 46 chromosomes. Yeah. They then have to unwind at the right spot to make available one tiny little strip of DNA. 6 feet of DNA, by the way, is kind of a big number when you're thinking microscopically. But when you start to put your 70 trillion cells together, then it gets to be a really bizarre thought. The DNA in your body, if we started to string it end to end, would wrap around Mother Earth 2 million times. And so...
And then we took a 15-minute break, and I got my brain back in order again.
So you wrap around Mother Earth 2 million times, and that DNA has to repair itself every day. And so there's enzymes that zip along your DNA and do repairs. And so you're repairing your DNA every time we walk out in the sunshine, millions and millions of base paired DNA damage throughout the whole body, and that needs to repair constantly. So you have this universe, this factory of repair that's always in motion. And simultaneously, you have this plasticity happening where you're responding to the bacteria in your gut, what they just ate, and they're modifying your behavior. And so not only...
Is this what they'd call neuroplasticity then? As far as being able to take in, maybe that's the consciousness element? I don't know. I mean, but neuroplasticity,
You've heard of that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so neuroplasticity is actually where I got my first root. This was like late 1990s. I started working with Philip Gold at the NIH around psychoneuroendocrinology was the little niche. And that word doesn't even need to be dissected at this moment, but psychoneuroendocrinology was the description that your mood could modify your brain. Mm-hmm. And what we now find out, 30 years later or 20 years later, we're now seeing this phenomenon that the bacteria in your gut and their response to the food you just put in your mouth can modify the neurologic synapse or the production of neurotransmitters at your gut lining that'll then go modify your macro behavior. And we now know that a change in your microbiome can cause major depression, anxiety disorder, or in fact cancers and everything else. So the neuroplasticity that you refer to is the concept that a brain can change. And as of 1992, we didn't think that was possible. You were born with the neurons that you had, and you slowly lost neurons over the course of your life, and that was where you were stuck. And if you lost a neuron, that was just dumb luck, and you could never get that back. When we found out that you could actually birth neurons all the time, that was an exciting moment. And it turns out that
how do you do that?
Well, for women, it's you have a huge advantage. Is that every time you have a menstrual cycle, you birth new neurons very quickly. These dendritic, and not only are neurons starting to redifferentiate, you actually get an explosion of dendrites at the end of them. The dendrites are like the network coming out the end of a neuron to connect to other neurons. And so women have the ability to make new connectivity within the brain every month.
Is there any connection to when a baby is growing, they have a lot of, what's the three-letter, DMT.
Oh, yeah.
DMT. And that is like a life force energy. And so on a smaller scale, you have your cycle, those babies don't become real. But is there like DMT in that? Does that help? What is that? I can't even say the word that it stands for, but it's like it's a...
Didn't you used to race cars or something?
I did.
Okay. So you've got an interest in reading or like...
I do.
Really out there.
I do.
All right. So yeah.
But we all carry DMT within us at all times.
Yeah,
it's not that we...
gland, right,
yes, we
brain,
all have it. But there's a lot more of it in a baby, and when it's growing. Is this true?
The amount of DMT in the brain DMT is produced just like any other neurotransmitter or chemical in the body. So it's produced all the time. So it's not like there was a huge reservoir in the baby, but at the release of it comes at very predictable moments. The moment of labor, for example, when a child is born, there's a huge DMT release from mom and baby in that phase. The other place...
That's why you can smile after it's over with then.
That's why you would have 2 children. And so, there's an immediate erasure of the trauma you may have just gone through,
really?
Or the extreme.
Okay.
And so that DMT release puts you in that kind of what might be referred to as that God moment, where you have this sense of huge connectivity to nature and to creation itself, and you have this like high of I am omnipotent in my capacity for this production of life. And so you suddenly forgot the last 3 days were some of the most intense, painful experiences you've ever had in your life. And so that kind of experience is there. But then on the other side of what we call life, this death moment, we see the same phenomenon of huge DMT release happening in this phase. And of course we can use plant medicines or drugs, synthetic drugs, to try to release DMT and other hormones and stuff around that to give us some sort of sense of singularity. In the tribal medicine world, ayahuasca is the classic. But then you can see the same thing with breath work. And so I do a lot of work in my clinic with just holotropic breathing and all this, because you can get, again, a DMT release and get people into that.
I see Gabby Reese and Laird Hamilton. They have the program XPT, but they, of course, work a ton. They do a ton of breath work. And so sometimes after I work, Gabby holds a workout every morning, basically, and you can go. So in her gym workouts, because the gym and pool workouts, and in the gym workouts, she'll sometimes do a breathing exercise afterwards. But even in the pool workout the other day when I was there was a group of guys that was doing, they were, riding an assault bike in a sauna, because that's what you do. And you have to wear oven mitts, because or otherwise you'll burn your hands on the handles, because, why wouldn't you? You just gotta be smart, right? Wear the gloves. The oven mitts. Anyway, they get out, they're laying on the ground, and I think, man, those guys are dead. And I would be too. Assault bike without a sauna is deadly. But then they've been there a while, and I'm thinking they're really fit, they're probably not dying. And then they sit up and they start and doing breath work, and like Gabby's sitting there laughing. She's like, oh, like the man breathing or something. And so, but you can get that euphoric body buzz that feels like, like an orgasm, like a body orgasm where your whole body is tingling, and it's just from breathing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they use all those kinds of words, neurotropic and all those things, and I don't know anything about that. But breathing is, even when I think about it on a simple level of like, as a human being, we are such shallow breathers. We just don't use much breath. We have so much more potential. So
except at the moment of labor. So child labor, you go into holotropic breathing unintentionally. Like you are forced biologically to go into holotropic breathing when you're in labor.
What is holotropic breathing?
Well,
is there a certain way to accomplish that?
Yeah,
Can
so
you
it's
do
very hard out push of air, and then there's a biologic response to pull air in again. So it's actually an exhale more than it is a hard inhale, and so you're focusing on exhale. And when you watch somebody in labor, they're yelling at her to breathe, 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 and she's not going, she's going,
yeah.
And so it's that intense output. And there's an immediate, easy inhale after.
I just want to be able to recreate this after we're done. So
that's right.
How do you get that done?
I'll go up in the stirrups and we'll show you the whole thing.
No. I'll just go sit and look at the ocean.
So all of these things around this is to say that we're understanding that things like DMT release and breathing and physiologic transitions from life, birth, and then what we would call death somehow are calling us into these moments of superconnectivity at the neurologic level that really supersedes the neuron at the point. At that point, you're having an experience where you're tied into something that I would call quorum sensing, because I'm always in the microbiome world, but quorum sensing is a term that came out of this understanding of bacteria and fungi, and how once you get enough volume of a species of bacteria or fungi, you start to get a hyperintelligence, where that species starts to do things that you can't really figure out how they could possibly be functioning in this high state of intelligence. So mycorrhizae and the fungal world of the kind of highways and networks under soil are good examples of this, that if you dump fertilizer in one area of a 40,000 acre farm, the mycorrhizae will really rapidly figure out where that needs to go in that 40,000 acre farm, and it will start distributing nutrients and resources throughout the farm. And so that's an idea of hyperintelligence, of like, you'd think this guy cares about itself and is going to like sequester resources. But instead of sequestering resources, they do the opposite, which is distribute resources intelligently across massive areas.
I feel like I've heard that nature is all connected through the ground.
Yeah.
Like it's all interconnected through something happening to one tree will connect to another tree. Connectivity there.
And that's the fungi that do that. And so the fungi are connecting the trees. And so, for example, the birch tree is really interesting. The birch tree requires very unique soil nutrients or root nutrients to grow, and yet it always grows in soil that lack those nutrients. And so it has to be within a certain distance from a certain type of evergreen or pine that produces those nutrients, and then the pine will pass to the fungi those nutrients, and it will go nurture a beech tree out of the ground there. And so there's this relationship or intelligence of how do we support the broadest amount of diversity in an environment, and that quorum sensing or that hyperintelligence is coming through this cooperative relationship to all these. And I think that's what ayahuasca does, and I think that's what, anything that would induce a DMT release is ultimately giving you that hyper intelligence of like, okay, I'm no longer limited to this small physical body, but I'm actually interconnected to an entire planet, and beyond that, a solar system, and beyond that, a universe, and all of that connectivity is now no longer biologic, but actually biophysics, and that is ultimately electrons. And so at the biologic level, we have fungi. At the biophysics level, we have the passage and transfer of electrons. And so through those two mechanisms, we have this wireless communication network that ties the entire universe into a singular hyperintelligence.
It's like the internet. Really makes you question the micro versus the macro, right? When you look at things on a micro level, sometimes there's disorganization, right? There's no, there's another word for it.
Chaos theory.
Chaos theory, thank you. But then on a macro level, things are organized and things are not. Things don't follow the chaos theory, is that right?
Oh, I don't think you can ever get away from patterns. So I think at every level you've got patterns there, and so
I mean, even like we're talking about hallucinogenics. I mean, patterns are always emerging in hallucinogenics. They're fundamental in hallucinogenics.
Yeah. And so the patterns that we can't see because of our perspective, and have you heard the word Umfeld? It's a German word, but there's some great TED Talks on Umfeld. But the Umfeld is our perception of the reality around us, and we achieve that through the biologic structure of our eyeball, the biologic structure of our eardrums and the way they interface with our brain, the biologic structure of our tongue and the receptors there. So the way we sense the world is entirely based on our biology, which of course doesn't rule anything, right? Our biology is the result of all that genomic stuff we talked about and everything else. And then you look at a bat, and a bat perceives the universe in a completely different way, right? And so a rose is an interesting concept. So a flower, we think, oh yeah, rose, red rose. The reality is a rose fundamentally has absolutely no color to it. There's no redness about a rose. The only thing that gives a rose the characteristic of red is actually the biologic shape and structure of our eyes and the cones there and everything else. And so we then ascribe a color, which is actually just a frequency of vibration of that structure. And we've come to choose that, associate that frequency as if it was a characteristic of that in our interpretation of that frequency. Whereas when a bee looks at that flower, it sees nothing red, sees no color whatsoever, and it sees a vibration there. And so it sees an aberration in the electromagnetic field, and it's drawn into that space, but it has nothing to do with the color. And so the Umfeld that we've created as humans have really limited our capacity, I think, to think to our full potential, to do quorum sensing on the level that we would have the capacity. And I'm very intrigued by the possibility that these experiences of birth and DMT release there, or death and what happens there, are actually helping us in those few seconds to divorce ourselves from the limitations of our Umfeld, our sensory perception of the reality around us. And that was one of my major transformations that was happening around the time that biologically I was starting to lose the belief of disease, at the same time as I was starting to lose the belief of our kind of concept of spirituality and consciousness, because I was having such bizarre experiences in the ICUs. In an ICU, you get to see what we call death all the time. And sometimes, very few, 4 to 6% of the time, we manage to bring people back from death through our resuscitation efforts. And so you might, do compressions and the drugs and the shocking, everything you see on ER or whatever TV show you've seen, all that stuff we do all the time, and it very rarely works, even in best case scenarios. But I had a couple of very weird nights in the ICU, one in particular that I was able to resuscitate 3 people with my team in a single night. And you couldn't have picked 3 completely different human beings. One was, an HIV patient that was dying from complications of AIDS. One was an African-American pastor who was surrounded by like 250 of his extended family and congregation who were just, always trying to get into his ICU room. And this extremely isolated, estranged from his family gentleman dying from AIDS. And then this kid who's dying at 18 who had some genetic disorders and bone formation, so had suffered hundreds of thousands of fractures in his life and was dying of complications of pneumonia. And so you just couldn't find three different life experiences different.
Right.
Managed to resuscitate all three of these people, and over the next 18 hours of being in the hospital with these people and their families, heard them tell all the identical stories about what they experienced between the moment that their heart stopped and the moment that we got their heart restarted. And in those seconds, they all experienced something that was really bizarre, and that they all experienced not the white light and everything else that you think of. They had an overwhelming experience of full acceptance. You are completely accepted.
I have a story about that.
Let's hear that.
I was in Tulum, Mexico.
Love that spot.
Love that spot. It's a super hippie area, very spiritual. And I'm only going to set it up because I have no idea if it matters or not. But it was like day 4. Word is it takes 3 days to really integrate into the energy of that space. It's day 4. We go and do a 3.5-hour yoga class with a guy named Raphael Shawn. And trust me, he looks like a yogi. He was doing, there was weird things happening within it even, and there was lots of breathing, but 3.5 hours. Then, I just said lots of breathing. Then we go and get a chakra aligning massage.
Yep.
Then we head back to, because I'm a very, I think about the future a lot. That's probably one of my downfalls, is that it can be good, but it's also bad in that I get very locked in on wanting to accomplish something. So there was a great little spot called Raw Love that has the best.
I know the spot.
Yeah, Raw Love. And I'm like, I thought we were going to have time in between the yoga class and the massage to go get a smoothie bowl or something like that there, or they're like living pizza, like raw pizza. And we didn't. So then, of course, ride the bikes on back up all the way from Yon Wellness all the way back up to Raw Love, which is a bike ride. And we get it, and we go get our smoothie bowls at Raw Love. And my friend Stacy, who was with me, she's just like buzzing, floating, and I'm literally like, you're annoying me. I need you to relax. So we go back to the place that we're staying, and I said, I'm gonna go down onto the beach and find us a spot. It was kind of like later afternoon. It might be a different area because I'm just gonna try and find sun. So I go down there, not enough sun. I end up wandering back to the original spot that we had been every day, and there was this dog from the very beginning of the trip that kept coming around, and its energy, its frequency was very much resonated with me. And I even said, I gave the dog a name. I named it Lucy, and I said that I feel like I was a dog in another life. And then I said, I feel like Lucy's me. And so the energy of this dog was weird in this push and pull way, that if I wanted to see the dog, because it was around like every day, I couldn't find it. But as soon as I let go of the grasping at wanting something, it showed up. And I was like, oh God, this is so weird. And so this dog showed up on that spot. And when the dog showed up, it was like a spiritual conduit to an energy, because I got that exact thing. I was sitting there. I have no idea how long it was. I think it was seconds, but I felt this extremely overwhelming feeling of total love and acceptance, and that no matter how long I have gone, how far away I've gone, it's always there. There's no judgment, total love, total acceptance. And I just started bawling, and I was crying and crying and crying and trying to keep my shit together in public. And then my friend Stacy comes down finally, because she was on the phone, and she came down, and I just started going, oh God, and I started crying again. I'm like, no, it's okay. It's Lucy, it's the dog, and it's my soul, and I saw this. And It was just that, though. It was exactly that. It was like I was able to feel that frequency. That's how I would say. It's like I felt the love frequency or God frequency or source energy. That's what I would.
Felt completely right.
Completely accepted. Everything was perfect. Nothing is wrong. Never has been, and also never will be.
And never will be. And so was that day 4?
That was day 4.
So let's take a look at that 4-day period from this standpoint of the microbiome, because it's fascinating.
Oh.
And so I would argue that you actually didn't have a human experience at that point. You had a microbiome experience, which is to say that it was through your Umfeld, your sensory processing, that you experienced everything you did, but the preparation for that was all in the microbiome. So it turns out that 72 hours, 3 days, is exactly how long it takes for your gut to completely turn over. You have a brand new gut lining every 3 days. And when you shift into a completely different environment, so you go from Southern California to Tulum, Mexico, the microbiome could not be, more different in those two spaces in a sense. And on top of that, you have biophysics, you have resonance frequencies that are geologically determined, right? So Southern California has its own geology, its own resonance frequencies coming out of Tulum, super weird energy there. Everybody that's ever been there has got the opportunity to feel that experience of there is simply just a different biologic or biophysics resonance in that space. And then you put a microbiology on that that's totally different. And over the first 3 days, the reason why it takes you 3 days to downshift is because in those first day, you're still receiving the information, your brain is receiving the information from the microbiome of Southern California. So no matter how much your Umwelt is experiencing something different, your brain, his primary input of the brain is actually the microbiome. 90% of the serotonin made that will end up in your brain is made in your gut lining. And so your brain is really being controlled by, or the input into your brain is determined by the microbiome and its presence there. So over those first 3 days in Tulum, you go through a complete transformation of the gut lining. Not a single cell in your billions of cells that lined your gut and interfaced with that microbiology is the same 3 days later. So your cells resonating in a new frequency are now sensing a new microbiome that is imprinted. And there's nothing that accelerates microbiome shift in a human being, I believe, more than a dog. And so here this dog comes into your life, and this dog is accelerating your experience of the microbiome of Tulum. Why? Because that dog lives in the soil, and so it's digging around, it's running around in the soil all the time.
I laid with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was petting it. You know.
were up in it, right? And
Yep.
So you're
Oh
like
yeah, there's a
petting that
picture of
dog
us like
and
third eye connection,
third eye
like we were like this.
Yeah, and
When we're done, I'll show you the
let
picture.
that dog lick your face?
Sure.
Yeah, of course. What do dogs do the first time they meet?
They sniff butts.
They sniff butts. And so I really believe the dog species was the first to really discover the importance of the microbiome, because they recognize if you're going to go see somebody, you need to understand their microbiome before you go listening to what they have to say. So they sniff each other's
Think your shit
butt.
don't smell.
Yeah, that's right. And so you sniff each other's butts, lick each other's butts, a really good microbiome, and then you go and lick the face of the human. And at that moment, you got a dog transplant of not just Elsie, you got the entire dog population of Tulum licked in your face, and for the next 3 days, you adapted to this information of not where Tulum is today, but thousands of generations of the street dogs of Tulum are interacting with you in that moment, and that's coding a new resonance frequency of the human cell that's receiving the information from the microbiome. You start to get a sense of just how crazy limited it is to think that we are human. Like we are simply the central processing unit of Mother Earth herself, and we are there to pick up information, process that information, and have the opportunity to do quorum sensing and hyperintelligence as a species. And yet I don't think we've ever stepped into that role. I think that we are so busy drawing differences between each other, not only not believing that we're part of nature, we don't even believe that we're part of other human beings.
Right.
So
Look at all the division we create out there. You're this, you're that. You're black, you're white, you're a man, you're a woman, you're from Africa, you're from China.
I run a company now with about 100 employees or whatever in a space, and I find it fascinating that here's 100 people within 7 billion people. They live and work in the same space. They all have the same goal, and yet their brains are still able to draw division between each other and find differences. That's extraordinary. Our Umwelt seems tailor-made to see differences rather than singularity. And so it's the one limitation of our species, I think.
Why do you think that is then?
Because I think it's also our greatest opportunity. And so I think
Is that our test as humans?
I think
Is that our gift and our curse?
I think it's our journey. Our journey is into this opportunity to use that Umfeld capacity to see the nuance of self-identity, understand it, respect it, value it, and then co-create with it. I don't think that other species, especially as you go down to bacteria and fungi, I think they lack the ability, or it's not even ability, it makes it sound like it's some sort of better thing. They don't do self-identity. Humans are very unique, and primates are unique in their self-identity capacity. And so I think it's in this journey towards understanding that I am a very unique being with a very ancient purpose that showed up right now to interface a very complex biophysics thing that we might call a soul or a spirit or just energy, depending on your worldview. That soul is now interfacing with a very weird little shell of biology. And biology is a fraction of the reality around us, right? So just like we were talking about the DNA, if we just look at the fabric of the universe we live in, it's 99.9995% vacuum space. And so with that 0.001% solid, we then create biology, and we just assume the biology rules everything. And
Right.
so, well, genetics
Believe
must
in
rule
it.
biology, and we believe in this stuff. When in fact, it's just a little bit, a tiny bit of solid stuff that's aligning itself to a biophysics event.
Right. The actual matter, real matter, doesn't make up for much.
Right.
It's mostly just energy. So the real question is then, how do we change this Umfeld? How can we reshape our lives? How can we reshape the way we see things? How do we shift our perception?
I think that we have to start as a society
Dogs licking you.
by certainly
butts.
starting to do a lot more butt licking.
Butt
And
licking.
You can just take that any way you want. But I think that where we're going with this is that when you see bacteria with an unfettered amount of information, they start to do this hyperintelligence. Same way in my cancer labs, what we see now, so I left academia but started my own lab in 2012, and we take a very different approach now to looking at cancer cells. They no longer are a disease, they're just the most lonely cell in the body. And if you reconnect that cell to a larger ecosystem of human cells, the cancer qualities of that cell go away, or if it can't overcome that limitation, then it just kills itself and disappears. And so cancer is a cell that's become so isolated from its greater organism that it's forgotten that there's life other than itself. And so now it's just on a mission to survive. It's definitely the most damaged cell in the body. And so you have this highly damaged, highly lonely cell. And our approach now in clinic or in a basic science lab is to try to bring enough information to that cell. A cell with unfettered information always knows exactly what to do for the greater good. And so if it's a cancer cell that can't heal itself and return to a cooperative relationship with its environment, it kills itself. You don't need a toxin, you don't need radiation, you don't need to cut it out with a knife, it simply kills itself. And so
Does it need cell communication to make that happen, or can it do it on its own?
No, can't do it on its own.
It's like people. Just welcome everyone in. Inclusion.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Go on in here.
And look at school shootings as an example of that. We in hindsight, go and figure out, well, that kid became isolated 2 years before the school shooting and depression and all the thing. These shootings are just the macro version of cancer, where here's an organism that was part of a 7 billion celled organism called humanity, got isolated, started to get damaged, couldn't repair because it couldn't understand its greater ecosystem, couldn't get enough information to understand its role and purpose anymore, and so it created its own little world and defined its own mission of, I'm going to take other life because I don't have anything outside of it. And so it figures out the only way it can connect back to the world around it is to do harm to its surrounding.
So how do you create cell communication?
And so cell-cell communication for the human is actually created by the microbiome. And so that's where our lab has become experts, is understanding how bacteria and fungi make tiny little molecules that will become the wireless network for communicating from human cell to human cell.
Right.
And so you can look at this almost like compost. And so the bacteria and fungi break down all the food on your plate into lots of nutrients and macronutrients, micronutrients.
We're talking about gut health now, right?
Gut health. And our definition of gut health was very
I want to
poorly
dive
defined,
into that.
right? And so if you ask any doctor what is gut health, they might come up with, well, it's like it's the right bacteria. You don't want bad bacteria, but you need good bacteria because it's the probiotic message in their head. In fact, there is no bad bacteria. Again, if viruses or bacteria were against us, we wouldn't be here.
You're eating the bacteria and they're calling that good. So
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So in the end, all this microbiome is composting all this food down to nutrients, yes, but then in 2012, when I was working on soil science with a colleague, we found these molecules that looked a lot like the chemotherapy I used to use. And at that moment, it was the realization of what if soil was a source of medicine and not just the plants that we've been looking to 4,000 years. And so we dove into soil looking for medicinal properties of soil, only to find out that every time one of those molecules is produced, it's always being produced by a bacteria or a fungi. And this closed the loop on some emerging science at the time, which was saying, if you're missing these bacteria, you'll get this type of cancer. If you're missing these bacteria, you'll get this kind of
saying it explains
neurologic
it.
thing.
Yeah.
It closed that psychological loop because we were making all these correlations, but no causation. And so in 2012, we suddenly realized we may have just found the causation event, which is if you lose that cellular signaling, if the wireless tower goes down, you get cell isolation, now you get disease. And that may be major depression, it may be cancer, it may be acne, it doesn't matter. But you lose communication, you lose life. And I would argue that our IT world that we live in now is disrupting cell-cell communication.
All right, let's talk about 5G then.
Let's talk about just even something simple like the internet for a second.
Wi-Fi in every house,
like,
I mean?
Internet is a great opportunity for humanity to connect. I don't think anybody argue that there is an opportunity now that I, as somebody born in a privileged United States environment, can connect with anybody in sub-Saharan Africa with just extremely amazing technology. You know, they're holding a little cell phone, I'm holding a cell phone, I can talk to any one of 7 billion people. That's extraordinary. Except that what we did was we commoditized that world of connectivity, which means we manipulate every one of those connections through the behavior of the IT world. And so it began, I think, around...
Are we talking about radio waves now?
We're talking about advertising. And so advertising manipulates human behavior, right? And so we commoditized, first I would say the really big leap was when we commoditized human curiosity. And so Google in the late 90s put out a search engine. You're curious about something, just Google it, right? And so that curiosity moment suddenly becomes monetized for advertisers to take advantage of that big data and manipulate your behavior. And you get that big feed at the end of your Google search or your Google output, and you think, oh, those must be the top 20 most pertinent things. No, those are the top 20 most heavily paid advertising things.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's paid advertising that's been tailor fit to your behavior, your
based
search,
on your data points,
your big data.
Yep.
And so your curiosity now is being monetized and manipulated back at you. And so we can't have cell-cell signaling, human-to-human interaction now. You look at Facebook.
Yeah.
You try to reach out to your sister right now, or I'm not even sure if you have a sister.
I do.
Reach out to your sister right now, or you reach out to a best friend and you think, oh, I'm having a social media experience. No, that relationship is now manipulated and monetized for the big data coming out of your interaction. The words that are being said, the speed at which those words are coming, the time of day those words are coming, all of that's being monetized to advertising.
Have you seen The Great Hack?
I haven't seen that one. I've heard about it.
I just started watching it. I fell asleep. It's a lot of information, and pretty much when I sit down at night and get a little horizontal, I'm out. Very interesting, though. It's talking a lot about this in analytics and Cambridge Analytica and all that stuff, and how, every human being has 4,000 to 5,000 data points about them, and that, wow, hey, raise your hand if you think your phone's listening to you, showing you ads. Everybody raises their hand. They're like, okay, well, probably what's even more likely is that's just how good it is at projecting what you want to see.
Yeah.
That's scary.
That's exactly right.
As shit.
There's some interesting data that now that Google actually knows when a woman is pregnant before she does. Yeah. Her subtle behavioral shifts around the moment that an egg fertilizes in her abdomen changes her macro behavior in very subtle ways, but her search and her behavior online can predict that moment before she even realizes she needs to go check that pregnancy test.
I've even heard of things like, I listened to a podcast of a guy who was talking, he worked for Facebook, and like you fill in at the end of signing in for something to do the last qualification that shows you're not a robot, shows you the blocks, and like, which ones have light poles in it? And then you click on them and how it's getting harder, and that's because it's using that information to create AI. And like everything we do is contributing to data, and data is like, I think data has now emerged as the biggest business in the world.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when I was growing up, IBM was Big Blue, biggest company out there. Microsoft then came on the scene. These were two giant service providers. They then were completely, overcome by Google and Facebook, which provide not service.
Sounds like mind control to me. I mean, really, honestly, this just starts to sound like mass mind control.
And so, if we back up to this whole concept that we just talked about, that a cell with unfettered access to information only has health. But if a cell only gets manipulated data, it will never know how to react. And so that's, I believe, where we're really at now as a society, is we are all reacting to false or modified or manipulated information.
Wow.
And so our Umfeld is being produced, the perception of the reality around us is being produced more by our cell phones and social media feeds than the taste of food, the smell of pheromones of our lover. These things that we've developed for millions of years, and we've lived the reality of this Homo sapiens sapien experience for 200,000 years, has now been supplanted by a different Umfeld, where we are actually experiencing a false reality built by partial or manipulated information that's building our sense of reality. And this is the thing that's keeping 7 billion people from quorum sensing, from doing hyperintelligence. And so I think we're only 1 or 2 steps away from a modification of the internet and information technology to take away, we need civil liberties to start to take into consideration of there can be no advertising between a human and their own curiosity and the output of the intelligence of their species, or 2 species speaking together can no longer be manipulated by advertising or any other third party. If we just did that one simple thing, change the way in which our social and political structures would control information in those online environments, we would suddenly be able to do hyperintelligence as a species. And I think we are that close to doing something we've never done, to reaching a consciousness and a hyperthink that we've never done, or we're at the point of the collapse of our species. We're about 60 to 70 years away from extinction, or we're just a few years away from our first experience of that DMT, total connectivity to our whole species, finally recognizing that not only are we connected to 7 billion humans, and not only can we accelerate the experience of thought, creativity, co-creation with our species, we can start to do that by the template of nature, and understanding that we need to completely change our product development, our technologies, the materials that we use for those products, and we need to start building those all on the template of nature. And we start to behave within nature's templates with unfettered communication. We will do something that's never been seen in this planet.
Have you ever heard of this concept of a new Earth? There's like the sort of very out there concept that there will be a new Earth that will emerge, that it will be in 5D, fifth dimension living, and it will split off from this third-dimensional world, three-dimensional world, and I don't quite understand how it happens or what, but I think it's basically like, if I'm going to guess, it's somewhat of a frequency shift that, just as you say, the rose is either red like we see it or not at all. They will just be a shift in consciousness that will not allow you to really see those people anymore. Like existence itself will shift as a reality for you. They just really won't be part of your world. I don't know, it's a little out there concept, but that's like some of the bizarre rabbit holes I go down.
I like those rabbit holes because I think that those are most true to what we understand biophysics to be today. So Dr. Feynman from Stanford was one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, and he really kind of teased out what is the 4th dimension, 5th dimension, all the way up to the 17th dimension in astrophysics, and then if we extrapolate biophysics on top of that astrophysics data, we can bring that to a human being if we want a bit. But the planet itself is a very interesting one right now, because We're told by the astrophysicists and the like that the vibrational pattern of the Earth itself has changed from 3D to 4D somewhere around 2016, 17 into 5D in the last year, 18 months.
Really?
And so we're right in the midst of this very
Really?
big shift as a planet, where we've always been in a 3D resonance since the birth of the planet probably. And then suddenly we're going through this bizarre biophysics shift on the planet where we're going 4D, 5D. 4D is very unstable apparently, and so you can't really stay there for very long. So after 1.5 billion years of 3D resonance, we briefly, in the split second of maybe a year or two, go into 4D, and then we're
What can you
immediately
explain that?
emerging.
Because that's one thing that haven't ever understood. Is I'm like, I don't understand why we're skipping 4. Is 4 not good? What's up with
It's just
4?
unstable, and so you're not going to create stability in that space.
Is it literally because it's somewhat? Does it have to do with it being an even versus an odd number? Or is it just something in the 4D frequency is not stable?
I think it's more the ultra structure of what a 4-dimensional pattern would look like that doesn't allow it to stay in that space long. And it's gonna devolve into a 5D. Now 5D, we might stay here for another 1.5 billion years. We don't know. It's a very stable phenomenon in physics. And so you could imagine our Earth going through this really rapid shift and then expect macro changes from that. And if we look at the last 4 years and everything that's happened here, whether it's climate change or political shift or scientific discovery, there's been these radical changes in perception. And I would say that what I just covered, that the microRNA is a good example of that, where we radically uncovered that we are in fact a single biology on planet Earth. We are a single genome on Earth that's all swapping information all the time. And that 98.5% of our DNA that doesn't make a human gene is probably hyper-intelligent gene material or genetic material that came from the viral kingdom ultimately. And so the viruses have been feeding us information. There's a lot of possibility that our genome, well, this is all theoretical now, this is actually going into my own brain, so I'll disclaim this, that nobody actually out there with intelligence is maybe saying this, but I want to bounce this off of an intelligent world with an idea of what if our 98.5% of junk DNA actually has the information? What if that was a Rosetta Stone of life on Earth? What if we could, from a human genome, map back to the viruses that began biology on planet Earth, or the fungi that would have supported biology, things like this? And there's some interesting data coming out that is starting to say that DNA is not actually the source of this information, that the source of the information may be the interaction between light and water. And so some of these weird experiments that have been done are showing that if you shoot a laser through a strand of DNA and then shine it into another egg in which you've removed the DNA, you can get the genomic result of a fetus growing from that egg that had no DNA in it, just through the interaction of light that has seen DNA in the past, and it transmitting that information into water, and then water creates life. And so if that's true, then we start to get kind of an idea of how, like Luc Montagnier, he's a Nobel Prize winner for discovering the HIV virus. And so Luc Montagnier in 2010 did this extraordinary experiment where he was able to birth a bacterium from a human T cell. And so a human T cell created, in an instant, created a fully functional bacteria that was then able to replicate and create all this stuff. And so he did this very elaborate experiment to prove this out. But what he was ultimately able to show was that somehow the human T cell knew that it needed this bacteria present, because that human T cell had just been shown HIV. And so when the virus showed up, the human T cell knew it needed this bacterium, and it created it from no genomic information on a microbiome level. And so these things are all starting to make me wonder
if... From the 98% that,
your body, again, wraps around Mother Earth 2 million times with genetic information, most of which doesn't make human genes. And so what if that 2 million times around Mother Earth is actually the Rosetta Stone for life on Earth? That gets really trippy cool, because it makes me think that here we are in the face of the 6th great extinction on Earth. The last great extinction, lose 85-90% of biology. And the biggest extinction we've had on the planet was when the oceans acidified and we lost 97% of life on Earth. And so I think that that's where we're heading. We're acidifying oceans. We're screwing with big microbiology as we kill microbiology on the planet largely through agriculture, through our agricultural chemical practices. We're killing that fabric. We could see a 97% collapse of life on Earth. But on the other hand, bizarrely, what if a sudden change of consciousness brings us into that new Umfeld, that new sense of perception of not only what the fabric is, but also our role within that.
Yeah.
What if we could rebirth the species that have gone extinct from the genetic record that we hold as biologic systems on Earth? And that gets exciting of maybe we could reverse this whole thing, and maybe we could be called to bring planet Earth into a co-creative environment and be that CPU chip, that central processing unit that allows for this hyper-intelligence to come to fruition.
Which would be very exciting. I think that you said something along the lines of, we need to wake the fuck up because things could get really good around here. Is that maybe what you meant by that?
That's exactly what I mean by that. I mean, I think if we're willing to have the humility to see just how far we've strayed from our potential, then we'll have the opportunity to step into a new potential that we've never had before. And so we can do that hyper-intelligent event. We could do a moment.
Go there.
What if all of history is waiting for this moment? What would it look like if 2 billion years of planet Earth, yes, but what if billions of years of this alignment of life intention within the universe and its resonance? All of the black holes now interconnected, and we understand that. And Stephen Hawking showed us that all the black holes are putting out structured information, and all these black holes are sharing information all the time. And so astrophysics as a whole is a hyper-intelligent space, and they are just waiting for biology to align with it. And so,
what if we as a species were part of a never-ending cycle of that? What if that is the higher species that are out there? Because we both believe in aliens, right? So what if that is the natural progression? What if that is like you say birthing a new like a new resonance, a new awareness, a new processing chip for this world? What if that is like the evolution of a species that's out there, right? Because there's all kinds of information on extraterrestrials and the levels of intelligence out there and various different ones. And so what if that's literally just part of the cycle? Like it's like on the micro level here on Earth, we go through this little cycle with mom, but like there's like this macro level of the universe that's actually like happening similarly, but just on a much larger scale. And like we'll become like we're doing this on many levels.
I love the thought experiment, right? Like, what if this is everything? This is our moment. And then, the thing that gives me pause, or the thing that kind of stops me in my tracks, is how privileged a spot are we in that we got to show up right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the beauty of choice, choice really creates joy. If everything was good all the time and you knew what was coming, you knew what's already been, and everything was just understood, it sure takes a lot of the surprise out of it. And it's surprise and something unexpected and choice in amongst all of it that really makes this existence as a human being unique. And I think that's something I feel like I've heard and understood from, whether they're entities that channel through people here on Earth, or even just an understanding for what we do have as a species. I wanna sort of get to a spot here towards the end, but we could sit here forever and go over this stuff, and it's fascinating, and I love learning. But I think having some sort of calls to action is really important, because if we're going to make a difference, there has to be either we have to stop participating in certain systems, we have to participate in others, we have to learn a new way of living life, a new way of thinking, and put ourselves in a different biosphere to, perpetuate this environment within us that's around us from being around other things. So I know that a while back you bought a cabin in Virginia, right? Quite a while back. Built a cabin in the country. So I just thought that was a good sort of entry point into what did you get from that, and then leading into how you live your life. Knowing all this, Jesus, what a burden, right? Oh my gosh, you just drive down the street and smell gasoline and go, I'm dying. That's it. My gut's changed for 3 days.
Yeah, 3 more days of suffering. 3 more days.
So what did that cabin do for you? Like, what was this something that changed your perspective on things, or changed even the way you felt?
Yeah, I mean, I went after that not knowing anything that I know today. I went after that cabin, I think, for a sense of grounding. I went after that experience because I'd always wanted to build my own house, and the opportunity to do that with my son was amazing, and we built that place. And now in hindsight, I know that it saved my life on a lot of levels. I went through a lot of heartbreak and a lot of challenges in that period of my life, and now in hindsight, recognizing the microbiome for what it was, I was steeped in some of the oldest flora and fauna on the planet in the woods of Virginia, and the amount of humus soil. I happened to, by chance or by provision of the universe, buy a piece of 6 acres of land by these 6 acres that had been untouched, hadn't been clear cut or anything else for over 100 years. And so the humus mass of the topsoil is 18, 20 inches deep. And so when you walk through the forest, you get this sense of like you're walking on air, or this Nike-like sponge material. Like, what is that even made of? It just doesn't feel like the dirt that you've ever walked on, because it's just like,
I know this dirt. I need you to. Oh my gosh.
Air, and there's life within that top 20 inches of soil that you get a sense of. And so I was breathing that for years in the same experience. That's where I was working and living every day, to come into this moment where I would become most fascinated and become most expert perhaps in the microbiome versus cancer or any of the other things I'd studied for 20 years. I think I was having a hyper-intelligent moment just from being constantly steeped in that environment, just like you had the moment in 3 Days into Loom. That piece of land has recoded my genome. That piece of land has rewired my brain over the 15 years or 12 years that I've been living in that space. And so to say, what did that cabin do? It changed the fabric of who I am today because of the environment that it created around it. But I would say that now that I have the blessing of traveling the world every week, some new amazing place. Toronto this past weekend, out in a regenerative farm outside of Toronto, breathing this air of this high temperate climate. Fascinating what that did to me and how that changed me. And now I'm in your home, and I'm picking up on the hyperintelligence of your overall experience that you've had, and in a weird way, you're modifying my human experience in a way that I can't ever let go of. And so, as far as right this second, you've had a bigger experience on me, or you've had a bigger impact on me than perhaps my 12 years in that cabin did, because it's right now. And that's really important, I think, when we start to think about how are we possibly going to heal fast enough, because right now the numbers say we can't. Our sperm counts as a species have dropped from 57% in just the last 3 decades. 1 in 3 males is infertile. If we're continuing this trajectory, there's no flattening. So we fast forward just another 3 or 4 decades, and suddenly 90% of males are infertile. Our species is collapsing. Meanwhile, children in the United States now, 52% of them are diagnosed with a chronic disease before they're 18. Right. 1 in 3 children will have autism by 2035. 80% of adults will have cancer by that same time period. And so there's literally no way we can turn this boat around fast enough biologically. But all of that is the past. And what is more important is right this second. And if you and I can modify each other's genome right now in a more profound way than any of our past could have done, then it would suggest that our past doesn't actually matter, other than a learning experience. History is there to demonstrate what not to do. If we keep taking history and printing it on the future, we will simply disappear off the surface of the planet, which will be good for the biology on Earth. And when we disappear, finally, diversity
love the
will
saying
take
that it's
over.
like if all the plants and animals disappeared, we would die. If we died, all the plants and animals would flourish.
It would recover. Yeah.
That's some perspective, right?
Chernobyl's a great example of that. Humans had to move out of Chernobyl over those last 4.5 decades since that massive nuclear
Yeah,
event.
it's beautiful.
The most huge explosion of diversity. Wolves are back and the voles are thriving in that radioactive soil. Mother Earth is back to thriving in still the most contaminated corner of the planet.
Wow.
Mother Earth couldn't care less. Mother Earth designed uranium. You don't think she knows how to deal with that stuff?
Well, I definitely believe in that as far as like if we are biological beings and there's a problem, there's a fix. That's the balance of the universe. That's the balance of the world. It's like it must be a law. I'm sure there's some kind of law for that. But I really truly believe that we just don't know what it is, right? We eat, I eat, cordyceps and reishi and lion's mane, and I love eating mushrooms. But look, I've clearly not covered a lot of the mushrooms. So
You have 4,999,600.
so that's about it. So, when you think about that giant perspective, like that giant perspective of how much there is out there that we don't know about, I 100% believe there's a cure out there, that we don't have to pump ourselves with synthetics and things that nearly kill us to kill what we're trying to get rid of. There is a fix. There's a biological fix.
And I think that fix at that biologic level is very similar to that kind of wireless communication network that we just talked about on the IT side. If we stop perturbing the cell-cell communication of human beings, at the same time that we stop perturbing the cell-cell communication down in our soils, then everything in between will fix itself. And so what are we doing to our soils today? And this speaks to that hyperintelligence of Mother Nature, is that today we are poisoning Mother Earth with about 6 billion pounds of chemical herbicides and pesticides annually. More than
Chemtrails, do you believe in all that crap? I mean, it's pretty understood that they're spraying things in the air.
Well, I mean, you take an airplane, you're spraying things in the air. It's called fossil fuels, right?
Sure, there's just
So
that
whether
simple thing.
Whether it's just the airplane or if there's geoengineering going on, which is pretty well described at this point. And
understood.
So they're seeding clouds.
Admitted. There's even a thing where you can you can guarantee a wedding without rain.
Yeah,
with
great.
geoengineering.
Enough spending, you can change that weather
Yep,
pattern.
like for $100,000, you can guarantee no rain on your wedding day. That's true. I read that. I mean, you can't believe everything you read, but hey, I don't know a difference between why it wouldn't be true.
Well, yeah, I mean, this week the big push from one of these Saudi groups here is to build the biggest city in the world, the size of Massachusetts, and it's the middle of one of the hottest deserts. And in their city planning, they've said, well, we're just going to use bacteria in the ecosystem of the air to seed clouds, and we'll reverse this desert and create the biggest city. And so all of the science there is that they've actually already found the species of bacteria that creates clouds and things like that in the air.
Oh my God.
So the microbiome dominates all of these spaces, and yet here we are as humans poisoning all of that with this huge burden of herbicides and pesticides. And as that destroys the microbiology of the soils, we suddenly create huge vulnerabilities, and that comes in as invasive weeds or viruses and other things that are affecting the plants, and so now we have to spray more. So we're in this chemical relationship to soil, which puts us in a chemical relationship to our food, which then of course carries all those chemicals into our gut, which is just another soil environment. So this is our organic garden that we then poison, and as that organic garden gets poisoned and destroyed and we lose that, the same vulnerability happens at our gut lining that would happen at the root system of the plant.
So two questions then that are practical for someone like me or someone else who can't even say these words, but are probiotics, are they helpful?
No.
They don't do anything?
Probably harmful.
Probably harmful. Okay. Let's throw those away, Danica. Is organic enough?
No. Probably harmful.
Oh, God. Okay. What do I do?
Yeah, exactly. And so how could those possibly be harmful? Because they're certainly going in the right direction, right? So probiotic industry was super important because it got us over the hump of believing that all bacteria are bad, and we started to be able to accept that maybe there was such a thing as good bacteria. So I think the probiotic industry, even though it's a chasing after the wind and really not the future of microbiome science, it was super important and played this important psychological role in helping us start to really uncover the microbiome as an advocate rather than the enemy. When we've been living in an enemy war-like state towards bacteria since the late 1800s when the germ theory kind of came out, and we started washing our hands between surgeries and
Propaganda
started
then?
that, and so it was really the human experience since our beginning is war. That's what we have always done as a species. If there's one dominant activity that we do, we are at war. And so when the germ theory came out, it was very conducive to our overall mindset of course, we're humans, we have to fight. We have to destroy, we're in a war on germs. Then cancer gets uncovered. By the 1960s, we have a war on cancer. And every day now, you hear about the war on cancer and the war on breast cancer and the war on prostate cancer. Cancer is our best friend. It's our highest opportunity we have right now to say, oh my gosh, this is the signal that our own bodies are losing touch with itself and manifesting this state of loneliness that we would call cancer. Instead of warring against that, if we would love those cells back into our body, we would disappear this whole condition. And so it was so conducive to the overall history of humanity. What does that mean? If we're going to make this leap of chemical farming to something much deeper than organic, which goes to this regenerative farming kind of concept, if we get away from pharmaceutical management of disease and move into regenerative health and healing, to make those leaps, we're going to have to give up the one thing that we really do best, which is fight. We're going to have to stop fighting. We're going to have to stop warring against Mother Nature and our own species, perhaps, and we're going to have to start to surrender into the flow of biology.
You're telling me all the things that I need to do with my whole life in general.
That's right.
Stop the war, stop fighting yourself, let it go, let it flow, surrender. Dude, I pull angel cards with my friends and spiritual geeks, and my card was surrender. I go, no. That's what I did. No. It said you can release you can release control or let go of control. No, I can't. I'm pretty good at it, actually. No.
I think that's interesting, and that's actually why you've been successful.
Yeah, right.
It's because you live in a society that rewards control. But it's an unsustainable state.
You need to get to the next level.
Right? And so you've been rewarded by your capacity to step into that common paradigm of control. And because you're good at control and good at having a vision and then going to manifest that vision, and you're doing that within a social structure that rewards your behaviors through financial or social status or whatever it is, what you're really telling yourself when you pull that card is, am I willing to surrender it all?
Right.
Am I willing to surrender my social status, my financial status, my economic status at a deeper level of just provision? Am I really willing to let go of my belief about political and social and perhaps even spiritual concepts of self? And that opportunity that we have has to be done universally now. We have to stop waiting for the next person to shift. Or we see problems. Everybody sees problems in the nightly news and has the attitude of I hate that. I totally don't disagree with that, or I totally disagree with that behavior, but somebody else will take care of that. That divorce of responsibility from, we all think that global warming is real and bad, but what is the macro behavior you're doing to help become a part of that solution?
Right.
And so let's maybe close this thing down, because as you said, I'm at risk of talking all day long here, but if we bring it back full circle,
2 episodes.
How do you really bring this thing into focus of what are you going to do to be part of this solution of human consciousness all the way down to human biology? What you're going to do is start to do something really fundamental, is have a different daily relationship to the microbiome. And that really starts at breathing for me. What is the air you're breathing? If you breathe 99% of your air from air-conditioned drywall boxes or foam cubicles or plastic off-gassing cars, your microbiome is extremely limited. And that microbiome is patterning your behavior. It's going to keep putting you back in an environment to reinforce its survival. If you instead step outside and spend 72 hours in a deep forest, walking through pathways of deep, spongy-like soil, rubbing your hand beneath the leaves of the ferns to release the microbiome of that plant into your breath experience, and you let that jungle recode your genome, you're going to have an ayahuasca event. You're going to have that plant medicine event, because its microbiome is now going to modify your perception of reality, your perception of your role within your reality, and you're going to do that. And so if you haven't spent time outside immersively away from that experience, and when you go out and do that, it's important that you really make the decisions to get away from the chemical patterning of everything that would follow the breath, which would then perhaps be next to your food. So why isn't organic enough? I set out to film this documentary, Farmer's Footprint, a year and a half ago with the mission of making everybody eat organic so that we could heal our planet. Only to show up on these farms and start watching these soil tests be done, showing that the soil in the organic farms was often worse off than the soil in the chemical farms nearby.
Oh,
and it turned out that what we were doing in those organic farms was over-tilling. So we stopped spraying and we start tilling with a plow, over-tilling or disking that soil into the destruction of its fungi and mycorrhizae and bacteria, such that we had completely dead soil over here. Ironically, the organic certification in all of its points never mentions nutrition or soil in the definition of what is organic. And so it doesn't matter how nutrient dense the soil or the food is that comes out of that, nor does it matter that you're even growing it in soil now. We can have organic certified hydroponics that has never touched soil in its life.
Really?
And so we have a certification that has...
What gives it the definition then? I mean, I've heard something like my friend in North Carolina was like, oh yeah, you think you have an organic cow? He's like, that grass is nuclear.
Yeah.
You know, things like that, where I get it, there's going to be corners cut, but what do you have to actually do to be certified?
Stop spraying certain chemicals.
It's the spraying.
It's certain chemicals.
It's like topical versus...
Yeah, so you can go spray BT, but you can't spray Roundup, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And so it's a basically don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. But it's not what to do. And so that's where our...
So you can put stuff in the soil, because it's not checking the soil, it's just checking what you spray it with.
Yeah.
So you could put something in the soil?
No's. So the deeper thing would be, what you should do is let biodiversity return to your soil. And to do that, you would have to stop tilling. And so if you stop tilling and stop disking, you just reversed the very history of farming on the planet right now. If you pick up any...
Is that called farrow, like our farrow? Having a field go farrow, where it like reorients its balance over a few years?
Yeah, you can let it go back to its kind of original kind of weed-like state. We try to train farmers to stop using the word weed and start to recognize that whatever plant shows up right now is needed. The soil is calling in those plants to do some sort of nutrient enrichment to that soil that's been damaged. And so you let life cycles return there, but deeper than that, you start to put those life cycles into diversity. And so we can speed that up by doing a 32 seed cover crop on that dead soil.
Yeah.
And so you suddenly seed biodiversity, and immediately what happens is all the insects come back, and it calls in the macroflora.
We do this in the wine world. I make wine, so you have cover crops.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I learned what I'm, again, not sure of that 100% of that word, but farrow or feral or farrow, they sometimes do that with a block and let it sit there for a few years. But every year there's cover crops put down in between the rows.
Yeah, and so what you'll see when you start doing, you move from a chemical management of that vineyard into a cover crop management, you'll start to see birds returning with biodiversity. And so you'll suddenly have owls, and you'll have rodents coming up in the soil again. You'll have some voles, or you'll have, the coyotes will come back to eat the voles.
Holes in the ground where they want to pop out.
Yeah.
Something's in there.
And so you've got life returning at the micro to the macro level within that vineyard. And now you've created cycles of biology, which is going to be obviously this regenerative process where every year it gets more and more diverse. And so I think that's the beauty of life, is it's driving for diversity. As long as we as human beings put ourselves against that and turn our back on diversity and push towards a monoculture, and that might be a monoculture of corn or soybean, or a monoculture of I'm American, I'm going to build big walls around my country, and I'm going to not let anybody in because those are immigrants or whatever, as we build those walls figuratively or literally around ourselves, as if we stop seeing ourselves as an extension of nature, instead decide we're going to live in an air-conditioned box our entire lives, we're going to limit our experience and all of these things, and we're going to ultimately be blown apart and go extinct because we are against the very thing that life is for, which is diversity. Connected diversity that is an ecologic sense of everybody has a purpose, everybody is valued, everybody is enough, and you are understood and seen.
Yes. We could end there because that was a really nice end, but it's not. So here we go. So have a farm, grow a garden. I would tell anyone to grow a garden. Would that be enough? Would that be helpful?
A great starting point, right?
I mean, I love that. I had a garden in North Carolina. I'm looking at putting in a greenhouse in Green Bay because it's winter when we're there, and it's like I want there's something to be connected with the plants. Like, to me, like, I love my food, and I take care of it, and I love to grow it. And I also think that it's nice to have control over that food, to know how it's been grown. And, there's just some sense of community when you take care of a garden. Like, I don't know, this is a little out there, but my food is nothing special. I'm not doing anything crazy to it. No, not really any crazy spices, yet everybody seems to enjoy it. And all I can say is that I give a shit about that food. I don't waste it. I don't even throw it away. I'm known as a food hoarder because I save it. Like, there's like an energetic connection for me with the food, and somehow it always tastes good. It's just not even that special. I mean, am I a good cook? Yeah, I think I'm a good cook, but I think part of it is just that I love that food. So for me, it's, there's more of a connection than just eating.
Oh, you just nailed it. That message was brought home in a really humbling way recently. I was doing a lecture on nutrition and the microbiome and all this in Northern Virginia recently, and this small event had flown in this couple from Icaria, Greece, which is one of the blue zones on the planet where everybody lives over 100 years old kind of thing. And this couple came in, and this woman spent 4 days foraging in Northern Virginia to prepare this 5-course Greek meal for us. And needless to say, one of the most extraordinary culinary experiences I've ever had. Every dish, like you said, was ridiculously simple and more flavorful and fascinating than you can remember food being. And she would tell us before each bite of food what we were about to experience. More than that, her care for it. And so, like, her description of an onion, she said, I went to buy some onions in your grocery store here, and I was horrified. They're these monstrosity, massive things. That's not how an onion is supposed to look. An onion is supposed to look oblong and small and have this explosive youth to it. I'd never heard of an onion described as youthful. And so she's giving you this whole, and it was like you're eating a child. She's got so much care for this onion that she's sauteed that's below the mushroom or whatever it is. And so I'm having that whole experience, and at the end of it, I got up to like kind of toast the chef, and her husband and her live on this 500-year-old vineyard that they've been growing in his family since its origin 500 years ago. Same vines, like the story is just crazy. And so I get up to do my wizened little lecture on we're so grateful you came and thank you for this nutrition experience, and went into a little bit of waxing poetic on the nutrients in the food they just gave us and the microbiome response. Thought I was super clever, and the guy just humbly stood up and said, "You're completely wrong." He said, in Icaria, we do not believe the food is making us healthy. It's not the reason we live 100 years. It has nothing to do with that. In fact, we never ever ask somebody, what did you eat last night? But we will always ask, who did you eat with last night? Huh. And they believe that's what's making them live long, is that at every dinner table in Icaria, there's an extra chair set to see if somebody will show up and share the meal with them. And so what you said was, I don't know about my food, but everybody seems to like it. It creates a sense of community. And I believe that's what they were saying as well. The food is not there to give us nutrients. The food is there to create a nidus for community, a nidus for a moment where we share something that was cared for and produced to nurture one another. And so I believe we need to start looking at our organic farms not as a list of check marks did we do. We need to start to look at our farmers as the first human interface with the microbiome. They are the heroes of our society, in that they are the first to step into this direct relationship with this diverse microbiome, this vast ecosystem of life within our soils, and they become the caretakers for that. And they will nurture from the soil, not food, but love in the form of information. And this information that's seated in the genomics of the food, in the genetics of the corn, in the genetics of the soybean, and even there you see truth and you see fundamental life coming out of it. And if we stop genetically modifying these things and let them have their own opportunity for biodiversity and moving towards their own resonance and their own sharing of information between the plants and the flowers and the birds and the insects that would all be there, when we took a bite of that food, we'd have a much higher capacity to turn to the person we're sharing that with and say, I love you, and I can see you. And I'm humbled to be sharing this food with you, and I'm amazed at the complexity that is in your biology. I can't believe that you wrap around Mother Earth 2 million times with the information of life itself. Above and beyond humanity, you have the code of life within you, and you're put here right now with 7 billion other people. Can you believe this sovereign moment that we're in? Can you believe we were given the opportunity to be at the tipping point of consciousness? And what if that was our meal?
Well said. Thank you. Thanks everybody for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. And also, thank you so much, Trevor Hall, for the awesome music. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.